Only one man holds the title of setting the U.S. federal government free twice, and that man is J.P. Morgan. Without the contributions of John Pierpont Morgan, America's transition into a global financial powerhouse won't be what you see today. Morgan was born with a great advantage. His father had made a splash as a highly successful businessman in the banking sector. It was through him that Morgan achieved early entry into the family business. But it wasn't until his father's passing that he achieved a degree of stratospheric success he could call his own. Without further ado, join us as we explore more on how just one man, John Pierpont Morgan, controlled the U.S. with his wealth. Morgan was born in Hartford, Connecticut on April 17, 1837, to a rich family with origins in the United States dating back to 1636. J.P. Morgan was the only son of Junius Spencer Morgan and Juliet Pierpont Morgan, and the oldest of 5 children. So his story wasn't exactly the rags to riches romantic story, because he was born into a wealthy home. Junius owned a flourishing dry goods wholesale business that his wealthy father had acquired for him. He taught JP business and sent him to prestigious business schools in the United States and Europe. Morgan was always a bright student with excellent knowledge of maths. Morgan's family relocated to Boston, Massachusetts when he was 14, and he graduated from the city's renowned English high school 3 years later. Morgan traveled widely as a teenager. He had seen the majority of Europe's prominent towns before the age of 15. During his travels, he acquired a lifetime love of great art, starting a collection when he was still in his teens. As an infant, he suffered from seizures and was frequently afflicted with rheumatic fever, scarlet fever, and terrible headaches as he got older. His acne rosacea, which badly irritated and broke the blood vessels in his nose, was perhaps his most apparent medical issue. Without treatment in the mid-1800s, his condition progressed, converting his unsightly nose into a scarred red and purple deformity. Pierpont's various medical problems required him to be isolated. This made him to be a loner and not play outside with other kids. After Morgan graduated from high school on October 1, 1854, Pierpont's father, Junius, was made partner at the London-based financial company George Peabody & Company, a flourishing London, England corporation that handled financial transactions for commerce between Europe and the United States. Soon after, the Morgan family relocated to London. At the age of 20, he graduated from the University of Göttingen in Germany and proceeded to work at his father's London office. But in 1857, he returned to New York City because he had gained invaluable first-hand experience in the business world. So he decided to start his own company, J. Pierpont Morgan & Company, in 1861. Since the nature of his job is to mingle with people, and in the process of mingling, a young woman caught his interest, and he developed a fierce love in his heart, Amelia Sturgis. Pierpont was captivated when he first saw Amelia, who hailed from a financial background as well. Pierpont and Amelia were inseparable for the next 3 years, and when his firm flourished, he utilized his newfound fortune to purchase her a Tiffany's ring, intending to propose. On the wedding preparation, Amelia approached Pierpont that she had a cough. As a result, for their honeymoon, the couple went to North Africa in the hopes that the environment would restore her health, but it did not. It got worse, and Pierpont hired the best doctors that money could buy. But her condition got worse, and the doctors confirmed that it was tuberculosis. And back then, tuberculosis was nearly often a death sentence. Unfortunately, it became clear that no amount of money could change her situation. Morgan fell into a deep depression and turned to work to distract himself from his loss. When Morgan returned to start his business career, the United States was on the cusp of civil war. The American Civil War, a war between the Union and the Confederacy opposed to slavery, began, and Morgan, who was too far busy to engage in the war, was able to use his wealth, like many riches, to purchase a substitute soldier or someone to go fight the war in his place. During the war, he was punished for his part in financing what became known as the Hall Carbine Affair, in which Morgan provided money to a person who used it to purchase outdated weaponry from the United States Army and then sold back to the government for a profit. A congressional committee later observes this, but a federal court supports the agreement and Morgan is pardoned. At the same time, Morgan was also involved in gold speculation, the act of engaging in a hazardous commercial transaction to obtain rapid or huge gains, acquiring gold in the United States and then selling half of it overseas. The international sales drove up the price of gold in the United States, allowing him to profitably sell the other half. When his father heard about these dealings, he convinced J.P. to bring an older and wiser partner into his company in 1864. On a good Sunday morning, Pierpont met Frances Louisa Tracy. He became interested in her and they got married. Together they had 4 children, one son, J.P. Morgan Jr., and daughters Louisa, Juliet, and Anne. After the war, the U.S. government was deeply in debt, and Morgan's firm became one of its primary refinancing agents, an organization that provided money so that the borrower could consolidate numerous debts into one that could be paid off at a more acceptable pace and rate of interest. Morgan had already accumulated a large amount of capital from his accumulated money or goods committed to the manufacture of other commodities, and he could also obtain finance through his father's London connections. He started buying up enterprises that had gone bankrupt during the war. He would purchase multiple firms in a certain region and rearrange them in such a way that had no competition and could function financially. One of the businesses Morgan began financing was the railroad industry. Competitions among railroad builders resulted in unstable rates and wasted profits in the industry. From the 1860s through the 1880s, new railroad construction occurred at an extremely rapid pace, and many powerful businessmen were only concerned with personal gain and didn't care how long or well their companies operated. A result of this competition was that the railroad network became overbuilt. Competing companies were racing to put down the track to lay claim to the best sites, regardless of whether those areas even needed rail service. In the last 3 decades of the 19th century, hundreds of railways went bankrupt. Morgan saw early on that the future of American railways rested in the construction of massive networks in which a single business owned all lines and functioned without competition in its territory. He resolved to correct the mistakes that had been made by the greedy railroad businessmen and stabilize the industry at great profit to himself. Morgan began purchasing stock in the New York railroads. He took over the Albany and Susquehanna Railroad in 1869 from financial supporters Jay Gould and James Fisk. The state then began investigating allegations that William Vanderbilt, the owner of the New York Central Railroad, was managing railroad rates in a discriminatory manner that may have violated New York state law in 1879. Rather than facing an inquiry, he gave Morgan 250,000 shares of the railroad to secretly sell in Europe. Morgan's $25 million deal considerably benefited his firm and made him famous for the exceptional financial return he secured for Vanderbilt. Morgan was even appointed to the board of directors of New York Central. He went on to fund more failed railways, reforming them effectively to alleviate the disordered conditions generated by rivalry amongst them. Morgan had been a driving force behind America's railways by 1885. He arranged secret meetings at his house with other railroad executives, forming the Interstate Commerce Railway Association to explore ways to minimize future competition on valuable lines. He first tried to form railroad pools or agreements between rival companies to share profits or divide up territories to avoid destructive competition and maintain higher prices. But many of them failed, so he moved on to forge mergers, in which one of the stronger railroad companies in an area purchased its competitors. Morganization was the name given to his strategy. He purchased bankrupted lines and provided them with enough cash to survive, implemented severe cost-cutting measures, and monitored agreements with competing lines to avoid needless rivalry. Many of the major systems were placed under the supervision of boards of directors or voting trusts that he and his colleagues constantly monitored. By 1900, he had seized financial control of the country's greatest railroad enterprise. He had made a great fortune, but he had also stabilized the troubled industry, bringing the rocky era of wearing railroad companies to an end. Due to a scarcity of gold in the country, the United States went through a major economic crisis in 1893. Bank failures began in April and spread quickly. 600 banks failed in the early months of the crisis, mostly in the South and the West, and 4,000 fell by the end of the year. During the same period, an estimated 14,000 enterprises failed, and the economy experienced a severe 4-year downturn. At the time, the United States lacked a central banking system, and Morgan and the other bankers were aware that the country's monetary system was at risk of collapse. Morgan formed a corporation to furnish the government with $65 million in gold, half of which was borrowed from foreign countries. This measure certainly freed the American commercial banking sector from failure, saving years of severe financial deterioration, but the country as a whole was not thankful. Morgan had made a fortune from the transaction, and the press was suspicious of his activities. Congress started an investigation, but Morgan refused to say how much profit he gained from the transaction. Junius Morgan died in 1890, leaving a large wealth to his son J.P., but the younger Morgan had established his own business, J.P. Morgan and Company. Morgan was in the thick of it all, a position he felt very comfortable in thanks to his wealthy background. Throughout his life, Morgan had been generous with his riches, contributing huge sums to social and cultural organizations like churches, hospitals, schools, and most notably, the arts. He was truly a major figure in the history of American industrialization. He was a vital link between those who had money and those who needed it. And lastly, he laid the path for industrial America's enormous, efficient, and powerful enterprises.